Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the youngster Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kit Cunny, on Twitter. How are things going today, Kevin?
They're going swell. You brought up the weather yesterday, and I still don't want to trade weather with you, but when I woke up this morning, it was 38 degrees down here in Florida. So it wasn't exactly beautiful. And it's still not beautiful. I think it's 48, but it is sunny today compared to yesterday. It was cloudy, so I guess that's what I'm complaining about is that it was cloudy yesterday and in the 50s. But today it's in the 40s and sunny, so that's the drama going on around with me.
Yeah, well, like you said, you don't want to trade, and I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to trade either because it is snowing in western PA today, and it is mighty chilly. Mighty chilly out there today, and I'm already you heard it, the pre-show. My wife getting on me that I haven't shoveled the snow yet. Well, I'm not going out there 3 times to shovel snow in 10-degree weather. Not happening. Just not happening. But I'll tell you what, Kevin, we had some playing games last night, and I'm going to get right to it. Today we're going to preview the West and the East, but before we do that, there was a couple playing games last night. The one that was intriguing to us was Kansas State and Wake Forest. I had mentioned that my pick was not solidified with Cincinnati with that pick. A lot of it was based on that play-in game, and that's the funny thing, Kevin. We're going over the brackets right now, and these brackets that have to be in, they have to be in by the first game on Thursday. I've never understood this because the play-in games, aren't they supposed to officially start the tournament, but I guess they're play-in games? But they're very important because, for example, had we had to have our picks in before the game last night, I very well may have had Wake Forest beating Cincinnati. I very well could have. And at that point, now that game is done and over, as I said on the show yesterday, I was wavering on that pick. It was one of those, not 100% sure on what I'm going to do here. Now that Wake Forest lost, I'm 100% sure I'm taking Cincinnati. Kansas State will still have a good shot at this game, but I'm taking Cincinnati. It just solidified my pick. I'm not changing it, keeping it at Cincinnati. So I know that was a game that we both thought Wake Forest was going to win. I was probably about, if you would have asked me on the Lyco-meter, I was about 90% in favor of Wake Forest just because of the experience they brought in from the ACC. Credit to Kansas State. They went out, played a good game. They played themselves right into the field of 64. So let's start there. What did you think of that game?
I didn't watch a second of it, unfortunately. I had it recording and saw the final score and saw highlights before I got to the recording, so that was the end of that. But game 1, I guess, or game 2, whichever game it was, I didn't see the other game, the 16 seeds, play last night. But I was, as you know and the listeners know, I was on board fully with Wake Forest going through K-State because K-State had been playing like crap going down the stretch, and Wake Forest had Collins inside, and I thought he'd put up 20 and 10, and Wake Forest would score 88 points and win, and then eventually beat Cincinnati because Cincinnati can't score. They play great defense, but they can't score. So that was my little 11 seed going into the second round to play UCLA and then obviously lose. But Kansas State puts up 95 points, I think it was, on Wake, and dismantles my Wake Forest dreams. So Kansas State's in there against Cincinnati, and I'm sticking with Kansas State. I guess not necessarily sticking with Kansas State, but sticking with this 11 seed. If K-State's going to put up, 95 points and their offense is going, if they feel confident and their offense is humming, Cincinnati's offense isn't going to put up, 80 points. But K-State's apparently can at this point. So that game surprised me. Wasn't a complete shock because it's, a playing game. Obviously, anything can happen, and realistically, throughout this tournament, anything can happen. A 16 has never beaten a 1, but it's going to happen eventually. So anything can happen, especially this year, with there being no juggernaut in college basketball. All these teams can lose. Wake Forest demonstrated it yesterday, and wouldn't surprise me if a 2 or a 3 seed loss on Thursday or Friday.
It very well could happen. It very well could happen. I mean, I went a little bit of chalk yesterday with 2s and 3s going into the second round, but you know that I went crazy up in that Midwest bracket and stuck to it. Filled out some other brackets and stuck to my craziness. Drinking the Big Ten lemonade. We're going to talk about some Big Ten teams today, Kevin, as we go to the East and we look at what's going on here. We'll start right out in the East. And Villanova, a team that has been near the top of the rankings, top 10 team most of the year. When I look at this Villanova team, a pretty solid team. And I'm not even going to say they got a great draw with their second-round game. I know they're a solid team, but if we go down, they got that 8-9 Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, who we'll talk about right off the bat. Two teams that I think can play good basketball if they decide to play. But let's start Villanova. MSM, I have no doubt that we are in agreement 100% that this is not the game where the 16 beats the 1. I believe Villanova is going to move on to round 2. What about you?
No, and sometimes, you realistically look back and there have been 8 different 15 seeds that beat 2 seeds, and, even last year. I mean, a lot of people, like I said on yesterday's show, a lot of people had Michigan State winning the title or going to the title. A lot of people obviously thought they were a 1-seed caliber team. And so what's the difference between a 15 seed and a 16 seed? Not much, realistically.
Not a whole lot.
So I'm just saying that a 16 is going to beat a 1 at some point. I don't see it here. I will never probably pick a 16 to beat a 1. I don't see that ever being a smart idea. But it's going to happen, and in a different region today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about a 16 seed, but I do have Villanova moving on to the play in the second round.
Well, I'm going to just turn it right back over to you. Who do you have them playing, Wisconsin or Virginia Tech, and why?
I have Wisconsin. And the one thing I wanted to say before getting into this matchup was I talked a couple days ago about Big Ten seedings. We talked about Big Ten seedings and how seedings matter. And, the committee, to me, got it mostly right. But the Big Ten was kind of weird. And I talked about how much transparency matters. And that's what coaches yearn for, whether you're talking about last 5 games like you like, last 10 games, last 12, just how you're playing going into March, or if the committee values the regular season more or the conference tournament more. And I didn't necessarily give an example for Wisconsin, and they went 6-6 in their last 12. I don't have it up right now, but I don't know what they led in the last 10, but regardless, they obviously struggled. And they got an 8 seed. They were the 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament, so they were second going into the Big Ten tournament, and they finished the Big Ten tournament in second, lost to Michigan in the final. Maryland went 4-6 in the last 10, 6-6, matching Wisconsin, and they got a 6 seed. So Maryland's a 6 seed, Wisconsin's an 8 seed. Wisconsin finished second in the Big Ten regular season, second in the Big Ten tournament. Maryland finished third in the Big Ten regular season, and I guess was tied for third, actually worse than that. They lost to Northwestern in their first game. So Wisconsin outplayed them in every possible sense. Wisconsin beat them in the one time they played during the regular season. So if there is one team outside of Wichita State that really has a gripe with the committee and saying, what the heck are we doing with this seed that we get, it's Wisconsin. Wisconsin is better than an 8 seed. There's no question about it. Just looking at the other Big Ten teams, Wisconsin deserves to be up there with Purdue, certainly closer to Maryland and Michigan. But here Wisconsin is as the 8 seed, going against Virginia Tech. Basically, Virginia Tech has Buzz Williams as their head coach, who coached at Marquette, and so he is used to playing Wisconsin. Buzz Williams likes to get up and down the court. He likes using 4 guards at a single time. Wisconsin's not a huge fan of that. They've got a couple bigs that they like to use. And so that's where Wisconsin's going to have the advantage is the interior, and they should have the rebounding advantage. Virginia Tech only goes 7 deep. They only have 8 scholarship players on the roster. So they're talented players, but they only really have 8 scholarship players. They use 7. Their top 2 scorers come off the bench, which is weird. Basically, they're an up-and-down team who is smaller, and they like to shoot a bunch of threes. Going against Wisconsin, their size, their discipline, their defense, I expect Wisconsin to move on.
So do I. I have Wisconsin moving on, but this game will scare me a little bit. If Virginia Tech can get out and run and make this a fast-paced game, I think Wisconsin could be in trouble. Wisconsin, if they can dictate the tempo of the game, if they can play their game where they want to move the ball inside out and have good shot selection, run the shot clock down, and make Virginia Tech earn their points, then Wisconsin wins. If this does get into a run and gun game, Wisconsin's done. Could Wisconsin hang with them for a little bit? Sure. They definitely have guys that can score. But when you look at what's going to be the staple of Wisconsin, it's can they slow the game down? Can they make Virginia Tech use the shot clock? Make Virginia Tech be patient? And at times, Wisconsin is a team that can do that. You know, they did it against a very good Minnesota team last game of the season. They did it in the Big Ten tournament. But that's what scares me about this, is what will the game be when it starts? If it's a Wisconsin-paced game, then they win. If it's a Virginia Tech up and down, fly them up and down the court, it's a Virginia Tech win to me, because we have seen Wisconsin falter and give up some points this year in the Big Ten. So I'm not 100% locked, but lately that Wisconsin defense has been very good. Like you said, I think they got hosed. Literally. I mean, first off, being an 8 seed, and then your second-round game is against Villanova, which we'll talk about that matchup as we come back down the bracket. But you're absolutely right. I don't know how Maryland became a 6 seed. Like, Michigan won the Big Ten tournament, Kevin, and they're seeded lower than Maryland. And I understand Purdue being a 4. That's fine. They won the Big Ten regular season title, and a lot of stock should be put into that. And then you look at the discrepancy between Purdue and then the Michigan at the 7 seed as the Big Ten tournament champion. So to me, Maryland at a 6, they're saying they were the second best team. However, when I look at roster makeup for the tournament, you and I have said this, and we'll talk about Maryland when we get to them. How Melo goes, so goes Maryland. They've got some good young guys, and they'll be good in a couple of years. But right now, this year, it's the Melo show. If Melo's off and Melo's not playing well, Maryland's not going to win. And we'll talk about that game here probably in about 20 minutes. That's just a rough estimate as I look at where we've got to go to talk about them. But moving on then, we got Virginia against Wilmington. Virginia, another one of those teams that their staple is playing very good defense, but at times Virginia can struggle to score points. Can Wilmington do enough, Kevin, to overcome a stymied defense but be the 12 seed that defeats Virginia? What are your thoughts?
They absolutely can be. But I talked about this yesterday, too, with mid-majors. And, you know, if you win your league and it's a small league and you're on that 13, 14-ish line or even a 12 line, you're obviously a pretty good team. You're not, you know, stuck in the back 15, 16, where maybe you got lucky to win your conference tournament. This is a 12-seeded mid-major that nobody talks about throughout the year in UNCW. And so can they compete and defeat a Virginia team who's been really up and down as far as Virginia is concerned? Their coach there, in Bennett, he always has a top 5 defense, and they've got a top 5 defense again. But it's not as insanely impressive as Virginia's defenses have been in the recent past. That's why they're a 5 seed, and offensively, this isn't a good Virginia offense. It's one thing to put up 62 points a game and, you know, say you rank 200th in the country in scoring per game. That's all fine as long as you're efficient in doing so. Wisconsin's been doing that for the last few years, although the last, you know, couple Final Four runs, those offenses have actually been, you know, really good and scoring a solid amount of points. But to go along with their elite defense, but Virginia has had the talent. They just play at the slowest pace in college basketball, literally. There might be one team that's slower, I don't remember, but they're either the slowest team in college basketball or the second slowest. There's over 300 teams. So that's what Virginia does, and with that, limited possessions means that you only have a certain amount of shots to go around in a game. So if UNCW gets a little hot from 3 and makes 3 more threes than Virginia does, that 9-point difference can be huge if the game is, you know, 62 to 60. So absolutely UNCW can get it done. They're a popular pick because of how quote-unquote down this Virginia team is compared to Virginia teams of the recent past. But I have Virginia moving on just because their defense is something that UNCW hasn't faced this season. So I expect Virginia to be ready. I believe in their coach. I still believe in their defense, even though this is a down Virginia team.
Yeah, Tony Bennett's story. I actually graduated the same year as Tony Bennett in Green Bay. He went to Green Bay Preble, played at UWGB. I'm a Green Bay guy. Wasn't friends with Tony Bennett, but ran into Tony Bennett every once in a while, mingling in the great city of Green Bay. So he wouldn't know me from Adam if I walked up to him and said, "Hey, Tony, how you doing?" He would probably not know who the heck I am. But that's my little Tony Bennett story. With you, though, I've picked Virginia to move on based solely on defense. I think this is going to be a game that Wilmington may try to speed it up a little bit because, again, limited possessions means you have to be very effective on offense. They're going to make you shoot the ball. They're going to make you rebound the ball. I think a big key for Wilmington, Kevin, in this game, if they want to be a 12 that upsets a 5, they're going to have to get second chance points. And where that starts is on the offensive boards. So can they dominate on the offensive boards and get second chances and extend and make Virginia play defense for long periods of time? If they can do that, they very well could upset Virginia because Virginia is not going to score 80 points. And so if Wilmington can get second chance points and get extra possessions with offensive rebounding, I think you could see UNC Wilmington advance. I don't have them advancing. I have Virginia moving on, and they're going to play the winner of Florida, East Tennessee State. And so as we've been doing this, I'll throw it back over to you. You got a Florida team seeded 4th. East Tennessee is 13. Do we have our first upset of the tournament, or at least in the East, the way we're doing this, Kevin? Or did you go with Florida?
No, we don't. I also talked about yesterday how this is the most chalk I've gone ever in filling out a bracket, and it's not because I love every single, higher seed or lower seeded team and, think the higher seeded teams are bad. It's just a matter of the matchups playing out how they are. I think that we'll talk about Florida State and Baylor as the show goes on, but I think those are very susceptible 3 seeds that if you had thrown a UNC Wilmington or even an East Tennessee State at Baylor or Florida State, I probably would have picked them. But just matchup-wise, Eastern Tennessee State is one of the worst teams as far as taking care of the ball. And I know Florida is a very quick, fast team that likes to press 94 feet. And so what they want to do is get you uncomfortable. And Florida absolutely has the better athletes. They lost their best rebounder to a season-ending injury, which really hurt Florida's chances as far as, potentially making an Elite 8 or a Final 4. They were that good, but without their big man, they're just another really good small team. Since their big man's gone out, I'm blanking on his name, but since he's gone out, they've been a pretty average team. But at the same time, Florida lost to Vanderbilt 3 times this year. They've lost 8 total games. So outside of Vanderbilt, Florida's been pretty good. They obviously have the better athletes, but this is another trendy 13-4 upset pick because Florida's trending downward. I just think Florida's the better team, so I'm going to pick them.
I'm with you. We've now agreed on 4 straight games, and this sometimes happens when we do these prediction shows. And to preface, again, Kevin and I do not go over our picks before. We don't spend 2 hours saying, who did you pick here? This is basically live to each other. We have no idea where the other person is going. So I have Florida moving on to Kevin. Basically, it just comes down to you've got a 13 seed in East Tennessee State. Could they win? Of course, anybody can win in the NCAA tournament, right? That's the way that it works. I just don't think they're going to beat Florida. This is going to be an intriguing matchup in the round of 32. Florida-Virginia when we talk about that one, because that could be one of those coin flipper games where it rolls and rolls, and that might be the coin that rolls away from you and goes down the hill, and you have to chase after it to see what happens in that game. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. The next game is SMU, Kevin, and then there's a play-in game. So are you going to go crazy wild here and pick an upset over SMU with another play-in game, or are you sticking with, again, chalk and going SMU here?
Well, you got Providence and USC, and they're two quality teams, but SMU, I forgot their overall record. It's either 29-4 or 30-4. They're in the same American Conference as Cincinnati, and so both of those teams absolutely dominated that conference throughout the year. And SMU, when I saw them play Cincinnati, just looked like the better team. Stemi Obelije, I forgot which way his name goes as far as the consonants are concerned, but he is a former Duke player. He got no playing time at Duke, so he decided to transfer, went to SMU, and now he's their best player by far. He's like a star for SMU. He has been all season. So if Duke had Semi as their eighth man coming off the bench, Duke would be the absolute pick to make. No doubt about it. You know, me being a Duke fan, not being a Duke fan, that team with SMU's now best player, Duke would have the depth. They would have absolutely everything going for them to win this title this year, but they don't. SMU's got them, and so I have SMU moving on, and eventually, not to give much away, but I've got SMU going a little bit of ways in this tournament.
Whoa. I wanted to make sure that I took a deep break there and took a drink of Kickstart, so sorry for the break there, Kevin. But like you, I have SMU moving on over the winner of the play-in game. People like these 6-11 matchups. They like the 7-10 matchups. These are kind of those games where you can grab a few points here and there. But when I look at it, you as a bracket filler-outer, I guess is what I'll say, sometimes you can't just look at the game. You have to look at what would be the potential matchup in the next round and where are you going to go with that. And so I like SMU overall. I think this is a team that maybe didn't get a lot of recognition throughout the year, but I think they have enough in the tank to move on at least to the round of 32, and then we will see what they can do against the winner of Baylor, New Mexico State. I know it's a 3-14 game, Kevin. Baylor, to me, this is a team, when you look at a 3 seed, that we talked about Wisconsin getting hosed, and I think Baylor got the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they're a 3 seed in my mind. When I watch Baylor overall, I would put them more on that 4 or 5 line, not a 3 line. I'm not saying Wisconsin should be a 3, but I don't think Baylor should be on the 3 line. But I think they get by New Mexico State in this game to set up a matchup against SMU. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, quick thing with the seeding. I'm with you on Baylor. I think, to me, I would say they're about a 5, to be honest with you. This is a classic Baylor team, but I'll get into them in a second. The committee is basically comprised of a bunch of NCAA, can't think of the word, but basically a bunch of athletic directors and, chairmen within the NCAA, and it's not a bunch of complete 100% devoted college basketball, fanatics who research and understand these teams to a T and understand injuries throughout the year and everything that happens to these teams. Any college basketball follower probably knows as much individually about these teams as committee members do. What they do is look at resumes, how they're playing down the stretch. If there are any really key injuries going into effect, they'll take it into effect, and notch a team a seed line or so. But they don't know necessarily exactly what's happened throughout the season for every single one of these teams. That's just the way it is because this isn't their full-time job, seeding teams for the NCAA tournament, unfortunately. So sometimes you have mishaps, and that's why every year there are a couple teams misseeded, whether it's too high or too low. For Baylor, going back to Baylor, against New Mexico State, I really wanted to pick New Mexico State. I really did. But I'm going with Baylor to move forward. This is just a classic Baylor team where they've got a bunch of long, athletic players who don't really know how to score. And they beat you with their long, athletic 2-3 zone. It's somewhat of a poor man's Syracuse program, but at the same time, they're getting more NBA players than Syracuse has recently. That's why Baylor's kind of, moving into this 3-ish, 4-ish, 5-ish seed-ish team, year in, year out. You always see Baylor up here, and you usually see them go out earlier than later. I've been a victim of falling in love with a couple Baylor teams, but that's because they've got offensive players throughout the years who, eventually make it to the NBA. This year's team, they've got probably one NBA player, and he's just a big forward who's really athletic and can shoot a little bit, but it's a classic Baylor team who I think is overseeded and doesn't have the offense to compete with any other legitimate team.
Well, like you, I actually had New Mexico State at one time clicked. I put the little blue dot next to New Mexico State at one time, and then I went back and said, you know what? I'm not going to do that right now because even though I think Baylor is overrated as far as seeding goes, I think they have enough to get by New Mexico State. Now we get to an intriguing matchup, Kevin. Marquette, South Carolina. I really like both these teams. To me, I keep talking about the coin flip. This is it. I'm still watching the coin spin around and around. It's over there in the corner of my room. It's still spinning, Kevin. I don't know which way to go. However, I gave the advantage to Marquette. And when I look at it, I look at the coaching of Wojo and what he's done at Marquette, and I think he's done a formidable job. And I think he's just waiting for Coach K to retire. And I think the Duke alumni, watching the success he's had at Marquette, that will be your next coach at Duke. And I think he's going to get a win, and I think he's going to move into the round of 32. And I'll just give my next pick because I don't think Duke is losing to Troy. I don't think they're losing to me. So I think it's going to be a Wojo versus his mentor, Coach K, in the round of 32. What do you think?
I think the same. I do think Jeff Capel will be the next Duke coach. He's kind of what has been the transition for Coach K's old style, quote unquote, of, not necessarily loving the one and done system. And Capel has been the guy to really say, hey, this is the world of college basketball now. We need to get with it. And that's why these last few years, the last 5 or so, Duke is always getting these one and done guys. And, you have to implement them into your system. I don't think you can have a real program unless you're Kentucky and Calipari that competes every year with really the top one and done guys every single year. But Duke is of that next echelon, kind of with Kansas, where they blend in these one and done guys. Maybe once in a while you get a top 10 recruit who stays another year, but typically they're one and done. But Duke has much fewer turnover than a team like Kentucky does. But so I think Capel is the guy who has kind of kicked Coach K in the butt and said, hey, we need to get with this. We're Duke. We can do this. And he's the one really recruiting those top high-level 5-star kids year in, year out. He's the guy making a lot of the visits in-house. So I think Capel's the guy, but if Capel weren't to be, I'm with you that Wojo's the next guy in line. I have no, insider info on that. I just know Capel has been a huge part of the Duke program these last few years. But Wojo, I love Wojo. Marquette's always my second favorite team in college basketball behind Duke. I've got Marquette moving on. It's just a matter of South Carolina being a smaller team, Marquette being a smaller team. South Carolina plays good defense as opposed to offense, and Marquette is literally the number 1 shooting team in terms of three-point shooting percentage in the entire country, which I did not know until I looked more in-depth at Marquette, but I think they shoot it at 43% from 3 as a team. So I'll trust that three-point shooting over a defensive South Carolina team, but these 7-10 matchups are really coin flips as well.
Yeah, it's tough, and the thing with, that's great three-point shooting efficiency, but it only takes one bad game to not shoot the three to kind of get blown out of the arena. And that thought does sometimes cross my mind. Yeah, they're a good team shooting the three, and that's one way to take the air out of a good defensive team is when you can knock the ball down from outside. But if you're not, and you're one and done, it could be a long day. And I'm not thinking that's going to happen. Like I said, I think Marquette's going to move on, play Duke. I don't think we really need to get into Duke too much here on the way down, Kevin, other than, I think they're going to take care of Troy. We'll talk more about Duke as we move into the round of 32 to get a little more insight from you, being the big Duke guy you are. And then we'll move on to the West. And the funny thing is, Kevin, in the East, every first-round game you and I picked the exact same. That is kind of scary. Just a little bit.
It is kind of scary. A little bit, but we're experts, so it's going to happen.
It's just a little bit. It's a little bit scary doing that. Let's move to the West. Number 1, Gonzaga. They had they had planted their rears as the number one team in all of the country for a long, long time. Don't play in an overwhelmingly tough conference, but they were the number one team. They sat there for a long time. They got a number one seed. They're playing South Dakota State. We talk about a year where maybe sometime in the future a 16 will beat a 1. However, I don't think South Dakota State has enough to take down mighty Gonzaga. I'm going with Gonzaga. What about you?
Understandable. I'm going with Gonzaga as well. But if there is a 16 to beat a 1 this year, I think this is where it is. I think that the chance is probably at around 10%. So I don't think it's going to happen. It's certainly not likely. I'm not going to pick it. But this, I think, is one of the more favorable matchups, I guess, for a 16 against a 1 that I can remember in a while. Again, it's going to happen, and it's funny because a few weeks ago I wrote an article about how this is Mark Few's best team at Gonzaga and how they've got NBA players on their team, players, not one player, but players. So this is the best defensive Gonzaga team. They have a real leader in Nigel Williams-Goss at point guard, who is a transfer from Washington. Gonzaga's got the players this year to win a title. They're one of my 8 teams that have the talent above the rest of the field that can actually win the title. So nothing against Gonzaga, but they do play in a smaller conference. They don't have the recent history, as in last 25 games, of playing a really good team. Not that South Dakota State is one, but South Dakota State has the second leading scorer in college basketball. So there's something to be said for that. And he's not, a 6-foot guy who's just quicker than, the rest of anyone in his small conference. It's not a 7-footer who just dominates all the small guys. But Mike Daum is a sophomore, 6'9" sophomore. He's, more of a big, averages 25 and 8, but he can step out and he can also shoot. They also, as a team, go about 8 deep. So this isn't a terrible 16 seed despite the record. I think the record's like 18 and 16. They weren't supposed to win their conference tournament, but this isn't a bad team. This is a good offense. This is a really good offensive player that they have in Daum, who will play professionally somewhere. You don't just average 25 and 8 in college as a sophomore just because. So he's a legitimate matchup threat for just about anybody. I think Gonzaga has Zach Collins, who's a freshman big, who's going to be in the NBA probably next year. He'll probably match up on him and likely will hold him down. But I expect this game to probably be closer than most people think. And if there is a 16 to beat a 1 this year, this is it. I'm not, holding any credit to that if it actually did happen, but I'm just giving a warning that if there is a 16 to beat a 1 in recent history, it would be this one.
Kevin, I want to tell you something. We just talked about the 8-9 seed in the East, Wisconsin and Virginia Tech. If this was the matchup down here in the West, Wisconsin versus Virginia Tech, I would have picked South Dakota State to beat Gonzaga because I would have picked the winner of that Wisconsin game to beat Gonzaga. Right. And I would have been crazy. People would have looked at me and said, "You are nuts." But again, it goes back to being a bracket filler outer. I really, when I look at that Wisconsin-Virginia Tech game, those are 2 teams that could really match up against Gonzaga, I think, and give them a game. And that's where you could see a number 1 seed go down in the round of 32. However, you're now looking at a Northwestern-Vanderbilt game. Now, I know Vanderbilt has had some big wins this year, but I think is a very inconsistent team. I've been the Northwestern, I'm air quoting, hater most of the year. I've shown them some love in the Big Ten tournament. I'm going to show them a little bit of love in the NCAA tournament, Kevin. Their first ever NCAA appearance, I have them beating Vanderbilt based on their defensive prowess. Northwestern is a very good defensive team. I think that they can clamp it down on Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt, though, is a team that can pull off big wins, and they are a very good team. But I think when you look at the NCAA tournament, you'd mentioned it yesterday, good guard play and defense, those are the 2 things you really got to look for. And if you can shoot from 3 and be very good at it, I mean, you can advance. But I just like the way Northwestern plays defense, Kevin. They've got a very good defense. I think they can clamp it down in the first round. I think they can get by Vanderbilt for a matchup against Gonzaga. So I give Northwestern their first ever trip to the NCAA, and I think the first game that they play is going to be a victorious one. What are your thoughts?
I'm with you. So far today, we are absolutely the same.
Now, Kevin.
Nothing different. Northwestern's going to beat Vandy. They're the first team to lose 15 games and make the NCAA tournament, yet they're a 9 seed. They had the number one strength of schedule in the country, and I'm not sure how. I mentioned it yesterday. They played in a down SEC conference for basketball. Football, a little different story. Basketball, they're not as dominant. They beat Florida 3 times, which is great. But they beat Florida 3 times, and outside of that, they're 16-15 overall. So they barely made it, being 4 above 500. Apparently, they weren't close to missing it since they're a 9 seed. But no team has historically ever only been 3 games above 500 and went to the tournament, outside of the occasional team that goes 500 in a small conference and wins their tournament. But outside of that, 4 games above 500, that's where you need to be at the least. But number one strength and schedule, they've got a 7-1 guy in Luke Cornett who can shoot the 3. Their team shoots 38% from 3. So they basically live and die by the 3. They've got a 7-1 guy, but he only averages 13 and 6. So he's more of a stretch guy despite being 7-1. Vandy is susceptible to turnovers. They don't turn other teams over. I think Northwestern is the more disciplined team. They are certainly the better defensive team. Vandy lives and dies by the 3. This is kind of the case of Virginia Tech, Wisconsin, except Northwestern doesn't have, Hap inside, so to say. So I'm trusting the defense. I'm trusting Northwestern to get by a 3-point shooting team here.
This is scary. We're more than halfway done with today's pick, and we're like 100% in agreement. However, now we come to a 5-12 game. These are ones that you can always say, maybe we're going to disagree. I know yesterday we disagreed on the 5-12, but when I look at this, I know people fall in love with this Princeton team when it comes to NCAA tournament time. They're always seated around the 12, somewhere in that range. They always play tough because of their style of play, but I just think Notre Dame is more athletic. I really was debating. I always debate a 5-12 when I look at it, and I kind of at one time was ready to push the button on Princeton, but then I also look at Notre Dame, and I have to give some stock to the conference this year that they play in, Kevin. In the ACC, you're tested day in, day out. Different styles of play, offensively, defensively, and I just like what Notre Dame is going to bring in the first round against Princeton. I know Princeton will definitely try to slow the game down, but I think Notre Dame is just more athletic. I'm moving Notre Dame into the round of 32. What about you?
If there's one team that I have liked more than anyone else, it's probably Notre Dame this year. It seems like no one ever talks about Notre Dame, and I think this is a classic Notre Dame team this year that is lights out from 3, and they're quick at the guard position, and they're a little smaller, but Colson inside, so to say, because he is both inside and outside as far as the type of player he is. Colson's a matchup nightmare. He's a bigger 6'7"-ish guy as far as his body type goes, but again, he can step out and knock down a 3. So this Notre Dame team is really dangerous to me. And going into the ACC tournament, when Duke moved on to the final, they were playing the winner of Notre Dame and Florida State. And I said point blank, Notre Dame is going to be playing Duke in the ACC final. I fully expect Notre Dame to beat Florida State, and they did. That was not a surprise to me whatsoever. That came as expected. Notre Dame got a 5 seed, Florida State got a 3. Florida State had the more impressive regular season, I guess, but I expect Notre Dame to win this game against Princeton. Princeton's a good team. Like you said, their style of play always keeps them in it. And this is a 12 seed. Again, mid-major 12 seed. They're obviously a good team. They're not terrible. But Notre Dame, I think, is far beyond a 5 seed. If you swap them with Florida State, 3-5, I would have been perfectly happy with that.
All right, let's move on to West Virginia Buck now. Let's see if we can get a disagreement here. I like this West Virginia team, Kevin, and I guess maybe because I live out in Western PA, that I can hear a lot about West Virginia. I can see a lot of West Virginia. I hear a lot about West Virginia. Heck, they've had Bob Huggins on 93.7 The Fan up here talking about tournament basketball since Pitt is not in it. This is a West Virginia team, Kevin, that's going to press you, and they're going to make you play 40 minutes. They're going to make you play the length of the court. That is what Huggins wants to do. He is going to basically try to run you to the ground and wear you out. And this West Virginia team has been very successful this year doing it. They had a couple blips on the radar, but I like this West Virginia team. I see them moving on with no problem against Bucknell. They got a very favorable matchup in the 4-13 against Bucknell, in my opinion. I think that their style of play is going to give Bucknell fits, and West Virginia moves on to play Notre Dame in the round of 32.
I'm with you again. Last year, I love West Virginia's style of play. I love that 40 minutes up and down, press in your face basketball, make you tired. We have 8, 9, 10 guys we can play compared to your 6 or 7. I love that. It's just fun to watch defensively. That is fun basketball to watch to me. So I love West Virginia's system. I'm not knocking them whatsoever. I just think this is kind of a classic West Virginia Bob Huggins team where they press you up and down, and they've got the athletes, and they're talent-wise more superior to Bucknell. Again, a 13 seed mid-major, they're not bad, but West Virginia is going to give them all they can, and Bucknell's not going to be able to survive. So I've got West Virginia moving on, but last year West Virginia was a 3 seed. I picked the 14 seeds in Stephen F. Austin, wrote an article about it, and how they can beat West Virginia's press and how they're good from the free throw line because West Virginia fouled a lot last year. I went in depth about it, picked the upset. It happened. I just think this West Virginia team is susceptible to teams with veteran leadership at the guard position and guards that don't turn the ball over due to pressure. Bucknell, I don't think they have it. Last year, I picked it, called it, it happened, but I've got West Virginia moving on to play a good guard team in Notre Dame in the second round.
Yeah, what you just said there is there is a way to beat Bob Huggins in that press. But like you said, you've got to have a team that does not commit a lot of turnovers, that can hit their free throws, can be patient at times. I mean, you've got to. It's funny when you play against that type of press, Kevin, because you got to be quick. You can't get stuck. You got to move the ball quick. But then when you do break the press, then you got to be patient and you got to be efficient. And I don't think Bucknell can do that. So let's move on. I'm hoping maybe this 6-11 game, this Maryland-Xavier game, maybe this is where we differ. Maryland will go as Melo Trumbull goes. I think Melo Trumbull is going home. I think the 11th-seeded Xavier Musketeers are going to take down this Big Ten Maryland team. Basically, my thought process here, as I said, Melo's got to shoot the lights out, and that's great. It's tournament time, and he very well could. They can ride his coattails, and maybe one or two of the guys will step up. But they're inexperienced, and I think Xavier is a team that can come in. They're not going to look at Maryland, and they're not going to be afraid, Kevin. Ooh, big mighty Maryland from the Big Ten. This Maryland team is not scary. If you can figure out how to slow down Melo Trumbull, you're probably not going to shut him down, but slow him down, make other guys beat you. I think Xavier can do that. I have Xavier in an upset moving into the round of 32. Please tell me you're going with Maryland so we're different.
Well, I'm going with Maryland. I am picking
right.
every single Big Ten team in the first round I picked to advance. That's not me being a Big Ten homer because I don't care. I couldn't care less about the Big Ten Conference and how successful they are. We talked about that yesterday in our allegiance and growing up in Big Ten country and how much that means to some fans. You find yourself rooting for your conference, but that's not me. I don't care about the Big Ten. I'm a Duke fan. I don't care about the ACC, so to say. So conference allegiance doesn't matter to me. Just the matchups to me kind of favor the Big Ten. I think some of the Big Ten teams were underseeded. I think that Middle Tennessee State is getting too much love, and so I like Minnesota over that popular pick. It's just how it played out this year. And I rarely ever pick a conference to go perfect in the first round, but I'm doing so with the Big Ten. It's probably not going to happen because you got 7 teams. They're all playing solid teams as far as talent's concerned. It's not like there's a 1 and a 16, a 2 and a 15. There are none of that in the Big Ten this year. But I'm going with Maryland, and I have to say this, that Xavier, when they lost their point guard, Edmund Sumner, who's going to be in the NBA, They lost him, and I believe it was February. It was either January or February. Once they lost him, that completely derailed Xavier. And so they barely got in the tournament. They won a game in the Big East tournament, which I think is what propelled them into this 11 seed line. Otherwise, I think they would have been out. If not the first four, then, they would have been out had they just collapsed in the Big East tournament. They didn't, but they're without their 6'5" point guard who's going to be in the NBA. So if you look at Xavier, where the hole is, it's probably that point guard spot, and that's where Melo Trimble is going to have the ball late. So I like Maryland just because of that, just because of the matchup, just because Xavier lost their NBA point guard. I have Maryland moving on. I like their freshman talent, but it's really just based on who's going to guard Melo Trimble. Trayvon Blewett for Xavier's great. He's not going to match up with Trimble just from a height perspective, position perspective. So Trimble has the clear advantage of point guard. He's going to do well. So like we've said, as long as Trimble does well, Maryland will do well. So they'll do well for now.
For now. That's going to be the Blewett-Trimble show. That's what it's going to be, actually. Those two teams in this game, whichever one of those two has a better game is probably who's going to win. I had to have a difference maker there. Finally, we disagree on one game. Let's move on to the 3-14. So you got a Florida Gulf Coast team, Kevin, and a Florida State team, and a Florida State team that has stumbled and bumbled here at the end of the season. And really, they were playing pretty solid throughout the year, and then it's all of a sudden kind of like, I don't know, maybe they got abducted by aliens and just played some bad basketball in a little bit of stretch there. We've seen it in the Big Ten, too, with teams also. But Florida State somehow secured a 3 seed, and, they got a 14. I'm just going purely with Florida State on this just due to the talent. I, at one point, thought, well, Florida State woes, maybe the 14 could win. But then again, I did my, NCAA pick-up brackets, and I looked at the game above that, Maryland and Xavier, and I don't have 100% trust in Maryland, and I don't have 100% trust in Xavier. So part of me is like, well, what's the worst of all evils of these 4 teams in this little 4-team tournament here? And so I went with Florida State. I could have picked the upset here. Maybe had it been a different game above them, I may have, because I think Florida State is a team that could go down. This is a 14 seed, Kevin, I think, that could possibly beat Florida State. And maybe you picked Florida Gulf Coast.
Well, I didn't. I picked Florida State. I've said multiple times on this podcast I don't think Florida State is as good as advertised as a 3 seed. I will say this, though, that the trio that they have are probably all going to the NBA. With Dwayne Bacon, Jonathan Isaac, those two are for sure NBA players in the first round. Xavier Rattan-Mays is another player who will probably make it to the NBA. So this FSU team is insanely talented. They've got bigs over 7 feet, multiple bigs at the 7-foot mark. So this FSU team is almost as talented as anyone. Just from a talent perspective, they're a top 10 team in the country. The problem is they're inconsistent, and they're not an excellent shooting team, so to say. So they've had ups and downs throughout the year. Like I said, I expected Notre Dame to beat them. They did. They're just a more fundamentally better team, much better shooting team. So I'm not in love with Florida State at all. I just think they've got great athletes and future NBA players. So Florida State's got the clear advantage over Florida Gulf Coast, and half the people that are picking Florida Gulf Coast are probably because of Dunk City and a few years ago and how fun of a run that was. But I'm going with Florida State, and the other reason people are picking the 14 is exactly what you mentioned. Maryland, Xavier, no one has trust in either of those teams. Xavier's fine. They're cool. Maryland's young. They have Trimble, but you don't trust either of those teams. So if there's a group of 4 to go crazy in, the first couple rounds, this is certainly one of those pods of 4. But Florida State just has too much talent for me.
So let's move on, Kevin, to that 7-10 matchup that is one of those pick-em type games. And I will tell you, I am debating this game. I have a few games where I look at it, I'm pretty well set, like 95% set on everything I want to do. But this is one of those games that I had the little asterisk by, and I look at St. Mary's, I look at VCU, and I really could hit the little blue dot on either one of them. I could take St. Mary's, I could take VCU. I think this is going to be a very good matchup, a very good game. But right now, recording this show, I am going chalk. I'm going with St. Mary's. I'm usually a guy who really leans toward a lot of 10 seeds in my brackets, Kevin. But for this one, I'm going with St. Mary's. I think that they can outlast VCU.
I'm going with VCU, so we're having another difference, which is nice. But VCU is not the same team without Shaka Smart, obviously. But they've got a lot of Shaka Smart players still. And Mo Alley Cox, it would surprise me if he's not in the NFL eventually as a tight end. He's one of those basketball players that Antonio Gates type, where he is just a really strong dude at 6'6", 6'7", who can fly up and down the court at that size. He is a physical monster. He's going to be a tight end in the NFL to me, putting it shortly. So I like VCU's toughness. I like how they get after teams. It's not Shaka Smart, but it's still most of Shaka Smart's players. And as far as VCU's offense, I don't love it. I like St. Mary's offenses more. So like you said, this is a coin flip game. I just like VCU's system and toughness over St. Mary's. But St. Mary's has the better offense. They've got the better big in Lockley. But I'm going with VCU to play Arizona in the next round, although I guess I gave up my pick saying that Arizona's going to beat North Dakota. So I guess, do you have that upset playing out?
No, I don't. I don't. Arizona, to me, Kevin, is a team, and it's again, you look at what we've talked about all year with this college basketball. I like this Arizona team. Arizona has put together a good program. Seeded number 2, I think they got a very favorable draw when you look at where they're at in this tournament, and then you look at what they have going on. You have them playing VCU. I have them playing St. Mary's and North Dakota in the first round. You know, no disrespect to North Dakota, but I don't think they got a shot at the moon to win this game. You know, but crazier things have happened now that I said that. North Dakota will be another 15 to knock off of 2. But I like Arizona, and we're going to work our way back up the bracket. And, you know, we try to go as quick as possible. Arizona is just a solid team. I have them playing St. Mary's. I have Arizona moving on to the Sweet 16. Not a whole lot to talk about there. I just think Arizona is more physical. They're more talented. They're just a better program, and there's a reason they're seeded number 2. I think they get by St. Mary's rather handily. I think they have 2 games that are very favorable as far as, air quote, warm-up games before they get to the Sweet 16 and get some resemblance of competition. When we work our way back down, we'll talk about who's it going to be. I have Xavier, you have Maryland, we both have Florida State. Which of those 3 will it be? And at that point, do any of those 3, do they have enough to get by Arizona? We'll talk about it. But I just like this Arizona team. Nothing real flashy about them, Kevin. They're just a hard-nosed basketball team that plays good basketball. And it's hard to pick against an Arizona team. So that's my little 2 cents on my thoughts on Arizona. I think they get by North Dakota easily. I think they get by St. Mary's easily, and they move into the Sweet 16.
As you mentioned, it is hard to pick against Arizona. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Anyway, I have Arizona moving on, and we talked about how these teams, Maryland, Xavier, Florida State, St. Mary's, VCU, we don't really love them. Like you said, the matchups are beyond favorable. Arizona probably got the weakest 1 seed, although I really don't think Kansas is as strong as people think. But good guard play matters. They've got one of the best backcourts in the country, so I'm probably underestimating Kansas as a whole. But I have Arizona moving forward. And then FSU plays Maryland in my bracket, and I have FSU moving on. If FSU plays Xavier, I'd have FSU moving on. Again, I don't love FSU this year, but talent-wise, they're just so much more talented than the rest of the teams in their pod. That's why I have them moving on to play Arizona.
Yeah, me too. Again, that's when I looked at this. That was a little bit of my thought process in that 6-11 Maryland-Xavier game. I looked at the four group there. Florida State has more talent. They're going to move on to play Arizona. We'll talk about that Sweet 16 matchup on the way down. To me, there's always those intriguing second-round games, Kevin. I talked about a few yesterday. This West Virginia-Notre Dame game, I've got this one highlighted. This is one that I want to sit my butt down in front of the TV and watch these two teams get at it. We just talked about Bob Huggins and the way that he plays, his style of play, pressing up and down the court, make you play for 40 minutes. Notre Dame has some experience. They've got good guard play. I like that Notre Dame team. That is going to be one heck of a game in round 2. Wonderful 4-5 matchup. You mentioned there's a way to beat Bob Huggins, and you said it was with good veteran guard play. I think Notre Dame has it. I think Notre Dame advances to the Sweet 16. What about you?
Like I said earlier, if there's a team I liked more than anyone else, it's probably Notre Dame this year. And I could talk about Notre Dame for a while, but I'll keep it quick. There's nothing to add from what you said. There's a way to beat Bob Huggins. Notre Dame has that recipe. I love their guard play. I love the way they can shoot. I love their ability to not turn it over against teams like West Virginia. So I believe in Notre Dame moving on. And then Northwestern Gonzaga, we both have that matchup in the second round. And this is where I have Northwestern losing, probably like you do. But Northwestern is a very tough defensive team, and so I don't think Gonzaga is going to kill them, but Gonzaga has more talent. Northwestern's not – I should say Gonzaga is not deeper than Northwestern, but just player-wise, talent-wise, they're more talented. I think this is the most talented Northwestern team ever in program history. I think this is the best one, but it's not up to the snuff of a Gonzaga yet.
No, by far. They've got a long way to go to get to that level. Definitely, you're right. I have Gonzaga moving on to play Notre Dame, and we'll move up then into the East, and we'll start at the bottom. Your Dukies against Marquette. Like I said, I like this Marquette team. I do like this Marquette team, Kevin, but I think Duke is just too much right now for Marquette, and they move on rather easily.
Yeah, I can talk for a while about Duke, but Marquette shoots, again, the top percentage from three. So if there's a team that randomly gets Duke into foul trouble because they're only 7 deep and Marquette's hitting 10 threes in that game, Marquette can win. I don't think it's impossible the way they can shoot the three, and Duke is not deep. So it's possible, but I've got Duke moving on.
And then we got SMU and Baylor. This is a game, Kevin. I am not high on Baylor. I like the way SMU plays. I did not go with the scratch in the 3 seed. I actually went with SMU over Baylor to face Duke in the Elite Eight. In the Sweet 16. So I like SMU over this Baylor team.
Yep, I'm with you. SMU, to me, this is one of the, I guess, upsets that I have in my chalky-ish bracket is SMU over Baylor. I just think they're the more complete team. Offensively, defensively, Baylor's really strong, but I trust SMU's offense a heck of a lot more than Baylor's. So, yeah, Duke versus SMU. And then we get into the top 4 teams left in this East region, and Virginia against Florida. We both have, despite the trendy upset picks in UNC Wilmington and Eastern Tennessee State, we have Virginia, Florida in that second round in the East. And like I said earlier, Florida is without their big man. And this is just a smaller, athletic defensive team. And Virginia is not necessarily small, but I don't think they're big whatsoever. They're again, defensive team that's on the smaller side. So they're fairly comparable to Florida, but I think Virginia's defense is a lot better than Florida's as far as the half court is concerned. You're not going to turn Virginia over at a high rate. So I just trust Virginia more than I trust Florida.
We're agreeing a lot today, Kevin. I have Virginia moving on. Again, 2 comparable teams. That could be a game you see that's a pretty low-scoring game. That very well could be. But I like, Tony Bennett has done it following in the footsteps of his dad. Even outside that he's a Green Bay kid. I think what he does defensively, I think Florida makes a couple more mistakes than Virginia does, and Virginia moves on to play, in my mind, Villanova. I don't think Wisconsin will have enough to take down Villanova. I think they could give Villanova a very good game, but it all depends on if those big three, Happ, Hayes, and Koenig, can all play at a high level. And I just don't see it happening in the round of 32. I would have loved, as a Badger fan, to pick with my heart and to say Wisconsin would beat Villanova, but I don't think that this is the game, not the way that they've played inconsistently. I know that they have played defensively very good as of late, but as you saw in the Big Ten championship game, when they get behind, it seems like they don't have enough offensively to get back from another team's run. And I think Villanova makes one more run than they do in this game, and it probably happens in the middle of the second half. I think when you look at 1-8 seeds across the board, or 1-9s, whatever you picked, this is one where I could see Wisconsin. If they got hot and those three really played, they could take down Villanova at some point. But I don't think it's going to happen. You know, you play this game 5-6 times, maybe it's 50-50. But I think in this game, I think Villanova wins. What about you?
Yeah, I'm very much with you in that Wisconsin has more than a fighter's chance to beat Villanova. 8s, 9s, typically just outclassed by 1 seeds, and I don't think that's the case here. I think that between Happ and Hayes and Koenig, those three can match up with Nova's best 3 players, whoever you want to say it is. There's certainly one of them. Jalen Brunson, their point guard. I love Jalen Brunson. So Nova's got talent, but they lost their top inside threat and shot blocker from a year ago. He's in the NBA now, Daniel Ochefu. So this is a guard-oriented team a year ago that had an NBA big. Now this is a guard-oriented team who doesn't have an NBA big. So I think Nova is very susceptible. I think they're very consistent. I think they play great defense. I think they shoot it well. I love Jalen Brunson at point guard. I love their backcourt. I like this Villanova team a lot. I don't love them. Wisconsin has bigs. They have Happ, and Happ can absolutely do work next to the rim. And that's what Nova is lacking, is a big that can deter Happ. So I absolutely give Wisconsin a chance in this game. I think that if it were a series of 3, I would really give a strong look at Wisconsin 3 games, but it's a one-and-done format. Nova has the more complete team. They have, I guess from a depth perspective, more complete team. I like Wisconsin's inside-out game more than Nova. So I think this is very close. And I wanted to ask you the percentage chance that you would give Wisconsin to beat Nova. Because this is a Big Ten show, Wisconsin's certainly interesting with their 8 seed. I think this is a Sweet 16 game, realistically, as opposed to a round of 32 game. But I have Nova moving on. But if Happ goes 8 of 10 from the field and scores 20 points and grabs 12 boards, which I can see happening, Wisconsin can easily pull off this upset.
Well, I agree with you 100%, but I just think Villanova's too much. So when we look at moving down the bracket, Kevin, we got Villanova against Virginia. I do like Virginia's defense, but I think Villanova has too much offensively, and I think they've got some veteran savvy that will take down Virginia, and Villanova will then advance forward in the tournament over Virginia, in my mind.
I'm with you. I will say this, that these two teams played each other earlier in the year, and Villanova won on a tip-in. So Virginia can absolutely push Villanova to the limit, but I have Villanova as well. I trust their offense more than Virginia. So yeah, we're both in agreement with Villanova, moving past Virginia. So in the bottom of that East region, you look at Duke, and I'm a Duke guy, and they're playing this SMU team that we agree on, and we think that SMU is going to get here, 6 seed against number 2 seeded Duke, but I like Duke moving forward. It's hard having a really tough SMU team and a Duke transfer being their best player play against Duke in the NCAA tournament. So that want to beat Duke is going to be none higher than unless you're a team like North Carolina to beat Duke in the NCAA tournament. But I think Duke's talent will prevail, and Duke will play Villanova in the Elite Eight going forward. What are your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, that's to me, it's just outclassed. SMU's got a good team this year. You had mentioned it as we briefly talked about them moving forward into this game. Offensively, I think they can do some things, and I think there will be some runs in this game where SMU can hang around with Duke and they can score and maybe be a little bit feisty. But at the end of the day, you look at what Duke brings to the table, Kevin, and I told those that listened to yesterday's show, Duke is that team that I pick them, and that means they lose. So if you're listening to this and you want to pick SMU, you could, because Troy's picking them over SMU, but I just think Duke is too much. Kevin, you look at SMU, and, yeah, they'll have a little bit of a nice run, probably a run that for that program is good for them. And I don't want to say they'll just be happy to get to that point, but Duke is on a mission. Duke is a team that is built for NCAA basketball tournament time, and I think they will go into this game and just take care of SMU, even though SMU will make it a game for a while because offensively I think they can score, but Duke just has too much for them.
Yeah, and the final in that East Region will be Villanova-Duke, but we'll work our way down into the West, and the Elite Eight there, Gonzaga plays Notre Dame, 1 versus 5. We have both of those picked. It's a theme of today that we are in agreement for the most part, and Gonzaga plays Notre Dame, and as much as I love this Notre Dame team and their guards, they just don't have enough inside to play against Gonzaga. That's my thing. I think Notre Dame can absolutely beat Gonzaga without a question. They can outshoot Gonzaga from 3 and, win the game 82-76. Not a problem. I just favor Gonzaga in this game in a one and done because of the bigs that they have. Like I said, Zach Collins is going to be an NBA player. They also have a 7-footer in Shemek Karnowski who's close to 300 pounds. He's a mammoth. Notre Dame just doesn't have that. They can't compete on the inside. They can beat Gonzaga from the outside. They can absolutely do it. I trust this Notre Dame team to get it done against most teams. But Gonzaga is one of those, like I said, top 8 teams in the country that have a realistic shot at winning because they are a complete team. Notre Dame's not a complete team. So I've got Gonzaga moving on. What about you?
Yeah, Gonzaga wasn't ranked number 1 just because people said, hey, yeah, you know what, we got to make somebody number 1. They've got a team that's a very good team. Even though they don't play in the most competitive conference in the United States or in college basketball, they still have a good team. However, I will tell you this, Kevin. When I went through my picks, this was the last game in this round that I picked because I did have some doubts, and I do have some doubts about Gonzaga not being tested against a team like a Notre Dame that is tested day in and day out in that ACC, where you're playing top to bottom, and even a team like Pitt, when they play Pitt, Pitt didn't make the NCAA tournament, but they're still giving you a game. They're still a high-quality opponent. And that's what you get when you play in a league like the ACC. So you're tested. And to me, that goes a long way. Being a former coach, a former athlete, when you have those tough games and you're forced to play, even if you lose, they're good games. And you may lose games even when you play good in a conference like that. But at the end of the day, I still have Gonzaga moving on just for the fact that you had mentioned that they do have a team that is very good and a team that I think, when you're looking at it from a perspective of going against a tournament game, one game, you move on. I think Gonzaga takes care of business and they move on and they move forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the ACC and how battle-tested you can be, and as a coach and as a player, how great it is to play against that competition on a nightly basis. Yeah, I'm with you, and that explains Duke. And Duke had 8 losses this year. That's probably why they weren't a 1 seed, is because they had 8 losses. So typically you see, 3, 4, maybe 5, 6 at most losses. UNC had 7, but it's the ACC. They lost twice to Duke, so those aren't bad losses. But Duke lost 8 times, and they're the Vegas favorite to win it, according to most. A lot of other places like Kansas, but Duke I'm seeing the most being seen as the odds-on favorite. But moving on to this West region, or we're still in the West region, but the bottom half of the West region, Gonzaga we have moving on to the Elite Eight to play the winner of Florida State, Arizona, the 2-3. We talked about how we're shaky on Florida State. They have talent. we're not necessarily shaky on Arizona. So I'm guessing we're going to be in agreement here. Like I said, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. When you said it's hard to pick against Arizona, I'm going with Arizona to play Gonzaga in the next round. I think Arizona is the more complete, definitely more consistent team rather than Florida State. And then Gonzaga, Arizona. Earlier in the year, Gonzaga beat Arizona. So it's not as though Gonzaga is completely unbattle-tested. They beat Iowa State. They beat Florida. They beat Arizona. But it was earlier in the year. Arizona had 2 of their starters missing. So it wasn't a complete Arizona team. They've certainly gotten better. Lauri Markkanen, the next Dirk, quote unquote. That's how NBA scouts are looking at him. He's basically a Dirk player. He's a 6'10", 6'11", big who can stretch the floor, but he's not entirely soft, but he can stretch the floor. He can shoot over 40% from 3. So Arizona has the bigs to match up with Gonzaga, which most teams don't. That's why Gonzaga went 32-1 this year. Arizona's got the bigs. They're a complete team, top to bottom. They have seniors. They have juniors. They have talented freshmen going in the NBA draft. I love this Arizona team going forward, and this is where I have Gonzaga's run ending. Again, this is Gonzaga's best team, best defensive team. They can win the title, but to me they're running into a juggernaut. Not necessarily juggernaut because there are none, but Arizona's as close to a juggernaut as can be, in my opinion, in college basketball this year. So I've got Arizona moving on to the Final Four. What do you think, Troy?
Say it ain't so, Kevin. Say it ain't so. Oh, just like you, I have the Wildcats knocking out the number 1 seed and finding their place in the Final Four. So, yeah, I have Arizona moving right there. I wasn't even going to go over anything else because we picked the same darn Final Four team. I thought, man, I'm gonna get one here. But I had mentioned it earlier. When I look at Arizona and their path to the Final Four, I really think that Arizona got a good draw. I like that Arizona team. And, yes, I said that for a reason. I find it hard to pick against Arizona because I know Gonzaga beat them earlier in the year, and that's kind of where the eyes opened up like, wow, this is a very good Gonzaga team, and it is. But as the season went on and you just look at it, and I look at both these teams that had very good seasons, you're now going to get to that game to get to the Final Four. And at the end of the day, it really is. And it could be a game, though. If Gonzaga wins, I wouldn't be like, oh, my God, Gonzaga beat Arizona. They could beat Arizona. But I just like the way that Arizona is playing. I like their chances in this tournament. And I have Arizona going to the Final Four. So let's move to the top. And let's go over that game to get into the Final Four. I'm going to turn it back over to you, let you give your thoughts. And let's see if we have the same Final Four team from this region.
Well, I just want to point out in the West that we had one difference, and it was St. Mary's VCU, the 7-10 game. I had VCU, you had St. Mary's. Otherwise, we're in complete agreement everywhere. That's insane.
That's just freaky scary to me. It really is. How does that happen? And again, I have to let the listeners know we do not go over our picks.
No.
That's weird to me, Kevin. That is weird because I also said that I could have picked VCU, and it wouldn't have made a difference to me. That's just crazy. Let's move up to the top. Let's move up here.
Villanova Duke. I'm a Duke fan, and initially, I picked Villanova. But I had to look more into Villanova and exactly how they play and exactly, their situation inside. Because to me, if this is a classic Villanova team where they have a decent big, which they do, and a bunch of good guards, that's why they don't necessarily make that Final Four push that people, pushed back on Jay Wright being a great coach up until last year, is because they were just a guard-centric team who had a decent big but not a great big, and so they would always lose to a complete team in the tournament. That had nothing to do with Jay Wright being a bad coach. He's a great coach. He's fantastic. He just didn't have the complete team that he had a year ago. And so this year's team is lacking that, star-studded, not necessarily superstar, but NBA-type level big. They don't have it this year. Duke does. Harry Giles is going to be in the NBA, no question. He's not 100% because of, multiple knee surgeries, but he was the number one high school prospect in the country coming into this year for a reason. They have Giles. They have Jefferson inside. I just think they're a little too much for Villanova inside, which is not usually a Duke thing. Duke usually doesn't beat teams on the inside, but they'll be able to put it in the post, causing Villanova to collapse, allowing Duke to hit more threes than Villanova will. They'll just have easier looks from three than Villanova will. So I have Duke moving on to play against Arizona in the Final Four.
At least we're different here. And I have my only number one seed making the Final Four in Villanova. But this is a game, Kevin, I talked about the picks in the rounds. And I'll tell you, this game, I talked about the Gonzaga-Notre Dame game. And then I'm talking about this Villanova-Duke game. This is a game that probably gave me a little bit of bald spots on my head. I don't have a lot of hair to begin with, but I kept grabbing my hair, like, which way do I go with this game? Because I like Duke. And the problem I have is when I like Duke and I pick Duke, they lose. And I told you that story numerous times. You're probably getting sick of me saying that. But then I look at Villanova like, well, they have the opportunity to do it. They can beat Duke. But no, Duke is a better team. No. And so I had internal conflict. But at the end of the day, I do like this Villanova team. I think that they can scrap by. I think they're going to scrap by Duke and get into the Final Four and play Arizona. And I know people are saying now, well, who are your Final Four picks? But guess what, Kevin? It's tournament week. We can't give it up today. We got to have a show tomorrow. We got to have a Final Four show tomorrow. So if you were listening the whole time, waiting to see who we picked, we are keeping you in suspense one more day. How do you like that, Kevin? We're going to keep them in suspense.
We're going to keep them in suspense, but I gave a couple wink-winks and nudges when you talked about a team today and them being hard to pick. So my cat may be out of the bag and my pick may be out there, but you may have to listen again to the show. Although you're probably not going to listen to the entire show, you can get a sense of who I may go with, even though I'm a Duke guy.
Yeah, I'll tell you. And tomorrow it won't be. I mean, I know, we're looking at our show and we try to keep it an hour long, just over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes. But you have to go through these games. And when you look at it, Kevin, it's one of those things as we recap today's show. Yesterday, you look at that Midwest bracket that I have that is just totally discombobulated. I have that thing turned upside down, left and right. And then you look at today's matchups. And when I looked at the left side of the bracket, there's a lot of chalk. And I know that at the bottom, you and I were all but one. But at the end of the day, when you look at the matchups, and I don't want to say it's easy to pick chalk, but really that was the one region this year that the matchups did favor the higher seed. And so I guess I can see why we were kind of on the same page there. But really, when I look at the left side of the bracket, the matchups are a lot easier in the sense that the higher seed, there's so many more positives as to why you can pick them and a lot more hesitation to try and pick an upset because there is a drop-off in talent. So as we recap the show, that's what I saw on the left side of the bracket compared to yesterday when I was going just gonzo, picking lower seeds to advance to Elite Eights and Final Fours and, so on and so forth. And today you're looking, you got ones and twos, moving into the Elite Eight, moving into the Final Four. I just think the left side of the bracket, there's a disparity between the higher seed and the lower seed, and it's not as close as it is on the right side of the bracket. What are your thoughts there quickly before we end the show?
Yeah, I'm with you. The one question I have for you as you end it is in the South. I don't remember who you had in the Final Four. There's North Carolina, Kentucky, UCLA in there. I had UCLA moving on, but
yeah.
So
that was our other same pick, and I have UCLA in there also. So we have UCLA as the same one, and then I have Purdue on the top, and then you have Duke and Arizona. I have Villanova and Arizona. So it'll be a good show tomorrow. That would either of those Final Fours would be good Final Fours. So those, I look at those four teams that we both have, and either one of those could happen. for sure. We picked the same UCLA team and we picked the same Arizona team. But I'll flip it back to you about the question about the talent and the way that the games were seeded and matched up on the left side of the bracket.
Yeah, I texted you after the show yesterday because, again, we don't script our shows. We don't ask each other who we picked. We don't look for things we disagree on to talk about because it's more interesting. We don't do that. We just say this is what's in the news in the Big Ten, the NCAA tournament, obviously. So we're going to talk about it. And we don't, discuss exactly our thoughts on everything going into a show. And I told you after the show that I'm kind of with you. If there's craziness to happen, it's in the Midwest bracket because I like Iowa State as a 5 seed. I like Purdue as a 4 seed. Can they beat Kansas? Absolutely. Nevada's got a couple NBA players on their team. They're a 12 seed. Creighton, certainly an interesting offensive team. Oregon, very talented, only 6 deep. Michigan, as hot as ever. Louisville's a complete team that plays elite defense. So any of those teams, and that's not even mentioning Kansas, can come out of the Midwest region. So if there's craziness to happen, it's in the Midwest. You picked it. I went more vanilla than you did. I guess I had 1, 2, 3, and 4 moving on to the Sweet 16. But if there's craziness to happen, it's in the Midwest. I'm with you. I would be more surprised at the East or West regions that we recapped today going nutso as compared to the Midwest. And then I think the South is absolutely controlled by take your pick, North Carolina, UCLA, or Kentucky. I just think North Carolina, UCLA is a more complete team than Kentucky this year, but those 3 are obviously coming out of the South. It's just a matter of which one.
Yeah, so with that said, the way we picked today, that means that on the left side of the bracket, there's going to be mass chaos, and the right side is all chalk. That's the way it's going to work. Because whatever I pick, I've said this on every show that I do, go look at my bracket and take the opposite. So do not pick what I picked. And so if we pick chalk on the left side, that's where you want to go and pick your upsets because, I've not had the best of luck the last couple of years. So, you look at the tournament saying the last 10. So if you look at my last 5, like I like to look at, my last 5 tournament brackets have not been good. They've not been good at all. So pick against me. But tomorrow, Kevin, I think we got a great show. Final 4 preview, our picks for the Final 4. And it'll be interesting because we do have 2 different teams in there. So we'll talk about, basically the 6 teams that we think can make the Final 4 for the listeners out there so they can finalize up their brackets. But it'll be a good show tomorrow. Make sure you tune in. Kevin and I will go over our Final 4 picks. We'll actually go over all 6 teams in depth that we have picked, 2 the same. And then we have 4 different ones that we'll talk about. So it'll be a great show tomorrow. Any last words for the listeners today, Kevin?
No, other than I have no Big Ten teams in the Elite 8, I believe. I don't have any Big Ten teams, and you've got Purdue in the Final 4. So if you're a Big Ten homer, if you're a Purdue fan, if you like the Big Ten Conference, listen to tomorrow's show because we're going to be talking about Purdue and their chances to win a national title, according to Troy. And I've said all year that Purdue's my favorite in the Big Ten, but I didn't pick him to beat Kansas. He did. So hats off to Troy, and Purdue's got a shot at the title.
At least a fighter's chance, right? Well, tune in tomorrow, folks, for the youngster, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. I am the old man. You can find me on Twitter, TroyRobert967. Have a good day, everyone.